Welcome to our first episode of the Modern Advice podcast. You are in for a wild ride. And I was watching this new show at the time called Bonding. I have this illuminating realization. Maybe what I need to help me with this horrible feeling of helplessness is to feel in control. I start Googling and find out how much they pay you to pee on them in a dungeon. We sort of fell in love and everything happened very quickly. It was intense, passionate, familiar. Maybe we're soulmates. The twist is that he was still in love with his ex-girlfriends. And so began a love triangle. He turns around and he picks her. We broke up. Several months pass. I'm healing. I then get a message. Your portfolio is now worth $2 million. And then on the 9th of May in 2021, my $2 million went down to about $40,000 overnight. I was obviously shattered. As we're reconnecting and we're sharing this experience, the attraction is still there. And I said, I want you to know that you can call for me at any time and I will come to you. I have 72 hours to pack my bags, get out of Indonesia, and fly to him. I'm going to cut this episode here and leave you with a cliffhanger because that's how we like to do things around here. Welcome to our first episode of the Modern Advice podcast. I figure what better way to get started than for us to become more intimately acquainted. So I'm going to share my story with you, and you are in for a wild ride, my friend. This story has all kinds of twists and turns, many cliffhangers, things that you didn't see coming, and a lot of really profound wisdom that I hope you'll be able to take away and impart on your own journey of love, healing, and, potentially entrepreneurship if that's what you do and why you're here. So I grew up in Melbourne, Australia, and I, from a very young age, always knew that I wanted to be a writer. When I decided to go to uni, I went to film school, even though my mum really wanted me to do a law degree. So growing up, both of my parents were immigrants, and my mum had very high hopes that I would go into a field that had a lot of security and safety, which is really important. And, this will come up later. And if you grew up in a place where, you had a lower socioeconomic background or a lower income household, then you'll be able to relate to a lot of where I came from and a lot of the challenges and struggles that I faced in my journey to entrepreneurship and kind of getting to where I am today. Towards the end of film school, I realized that there weren't many job prospects in the Australian film industry. And so I decided to pursue photography as a career. I did that for a couple of years, all while doing other miscellaneous work. I managed to sort of get a part-time job at a tech startup that was really fast-paced and growing. Found that I really enjoyed that. There was also the stability. That was a really ingrained unconscious factor in my being. Then I managed to pivot and break my way into advertising. And if you know anything about the business world, advertising is often referred to as the fun uncle because it's not really a normal part of business that you would learn. It's not operations, it's not human resources, legal, anything like that. Advertising is a creative communications industry. It's all about coming up with crazy ideas, art installations, film, and seeing how you can change and influence the consumer's understanding of a brand and get them to shift the way that they see something, get them to think differently about something. So it kind of combines creativity with marketing psychology, and it's really rad. I thought that if I could work in advertising, then I'd be happy. That's the closest that I could probably ever get to being able to hold down a 9-to-5. And I always knew that I was someone that would probably struggle with a normal or conventional life because I started traveling when I was 19. I knew that I was a bit weird. I knew that I was a bit outside of the lines, and I had a lot of curiosities. I was pretty restless, very creative, and I struggled to do things when I was told. I wanted to do things my own way. So I kind of thought, okay, this is my last chance to sort of have some sort of stability. And after about a year and a half of working in advertising at one of the best agencies in the world, I hit a point where I just kind of started to disintegrate. I became more sensitive to lots of things. I started to become more aware of my own thoughts and feelings and intuitions about the world, what was going on around me. And I realized that I wanted to become a better person and I wanted to pursue the path of self-mastery. All of a sudden, my intuition came online very strongly and it started kind of whispering things. We need to learn psychology. We need to work on ourselves. And I'm like, okay, well, let's figure it out. After a couple of months of delving into the self-help world and getting different certifications and dabbling in different trainings from Tantra to shamanism to human behavior, Reiki, any kind of energy work and all of the things in those realms, I then decided to very spontaneously quit my job without any savings or a safety net. That was probably the most stupid thing I ever did. And now with the beautiful gift of hindsight being where I am, I don't regret it. But if I could give anyone advice about quitting a job, I would say be more calculated, be more measured, and don't necessarily go all in without any sort of backup like I did, because it's just going to create a lot of stress for you. So I ended up racking up a lot of credit card debt, trying to figure out how to start a business, not really knowing exactly what to do or how to do it, really learning everything for the first time and being immersed in a completely new landscape, feeling very inadequate, probably a little bit underqualified, and feeling like all of the marketing knowledge that I had from my advertising job and the years that I'd spent in tech didn't really apply to this kind of game of building a personal brand. So I was sinking for a while, feeling like I was drowning, and eventually couldn't afford my mortgage anymore, had to move back in with my mom, and I had this 8-month period, which was probably one of the lowest periods of my life and one of the hardest. During that time, my self-esteem really plummeted. My identity became very blurry because I wasn't, the successful millennial professional that I thought I was. I was this failing entrepreneur all of a sudden. I thought, I'm not really used to failing. This is really weird. How do I stop failing? And I just didn't really know what the answer was. During that time, I met someone. I was introduced to this guy from a friend, a mutual friend, and she thought that we would really hit it off. She showed me a picture and I was absolutely disinterested from the very beginning. We ended up meeting at a Australia Day barbecue, probably about a month later. And we ended up kind of becoming friends and he would flirt with me and I would shut it down all the time. So he was a sexuality coach, which is very important because I got to a point in my depression from failing miserably and being so deep into debt that I kind of had this idea one day. I was watching Netflix, binging. I just powered my way through Orange is the New Black. And I was watching this new show at the time called Bonding, which, if you haven't heard of it, is a show about BDSM. So Mistress May is the main character and she ropes her gay best friend into her work as her assistant. I get through most of the episodes and then I have this illuminating realization where I'm like, oh my God, maybe what I need to help me with this horrible feeling of helplessness is to feel in control. And if I felt in control of my life, then maybe from there I could start to rebuild. So I think, yeah, I should be a dominatrix. That would be a brilliant idea. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't know anything about that. So I start Googling. I'm trying to look at how to learn how to do this. Are there apprenticeships? Where do you get work? And before you know it, I'm looking at threads to try and find out how much they pay you to pee on them in a dungeon. And so I'm like, all right, cool. This is actually not as much as I thought it was, but we're doing this for the psychology element and the personal growth element, not for the money. And I still don't have answers as to how to break through into this. And so I think, oh my God, that guy that I met at that party one time, for the sake of the story, let's call him Daniel. So I message Daniel and I say, hey, this is what I want to do. You're the person that obviously came to mind. Can you help me with this? And he says, yeah, I'm actually hosting a men's retreat at the moment, but I'll be done in a couple of hours. Why don't you come over and then we can talk about it, but don't be weird. This is very serious. And I was like, why would I be weird? Of course I'm serious. I'm very serious. So he gives me the address. I get in my car. It's already pretty late at night and I'm driving to the other side of the city. And when I'm already in my car about to arrive, I'm realizing that this is kind of mad. I'm like, okay, well, we're here. So that night was really where my story began. It was a very profound moment where I arrived at the house and I ended up having a conversation with one of his mentors who was probably about 20 years older than the both of us and a very experienced dom. When I'm sitting down with the mentor, he sizes me up and down, looking at me, and he says, what makes you think that you're a dom? And I was like, I don't know. That's why I'm here. I want to learn. And he just goes, no, I've been doing this for a long time. I have 2 live-in subs 24/7. I can tell by looking at people's body language. I've been in the field of human behavior. I'm a master NLP practitioner. He's like, I can tell looking at your body language, looking at the way that you hold yourself. You would absolutely get off relinquishing all control. Honey, you're a sub. And I had this big bubble burst moment of, what am I going to do with that? And he's like, why don't you come into the lounge room and we'll talk about what this is really about. So we then have a very enlightening conversation about spirituality and purpose, direction, how things happen, why they happen. And he gave me some insight on my predicament and basically said that what I needed to do was surrender and to learn how to really surrender, and that would be my pathway to freedom and kind of coming out of the situation that I gotten myself into with the debt and the feeling of I don't know what to do and I'm failing. I walked out of there that night feeling, for the first time in quite a few months, a sense of hope. The next day, I journaled and I had this really big breakthrough. I then start dating Daniel, who is about to move overseas with his business partner. And they ask me what I'm doing with my life. And the answer is really not much at that point. And so they say, well, why don't you move overseas with us and help us with our retreats? You can help. And I'm like, doing what? I actually said yes before I knew even what the description was, which is really hilarious. I was like, that's got to be better than what I'm doing now. So I'm in. And he said, well, you'd be a demo girl. And I was like, a demo girl? What's a demo girl? And he goes, well, I need someone to basically be a model for when we're demonstrating certain positions for the guys. We need to teach them, how to transition from one position into another. We need to show them what this looks like. It's all clothed, a bit. For example, I would even be demoing certain BDSM things, like we would be demoing throwing you into a mattress, like throwing you against a wall, things like that. And they would all be learning how to do that with you as the model or the demo girl. And I was like, that sounds reasonable. So I get, free kind of trip to wherever we are. And I kind of, think that maybe I'm going to be a part of their company and I'm going to grow with them and I sort of be like a co-facilitator in their retreats, because obviously I'd had the background also in coaching and behavior as well. So at that first retreat that we went to, I met my now ex-partner, who was a really successful entrepreneur. It was a very small retreat. There were about 5 men. 3 of them were very successful entrepreneurs. And I remember Daniel saying to me, you're going to be really excited because the guys that are here are really amazing. They're really high caliber. And I was excited for a multitude of reasons, not just because, the guys were really great, but because Daniel had a really inspiring story. And this is kind of how he pulled me in. He was telling me that he had about $45,000 of debt and he had just paid it all off. And that was kind of what sealed the deal and made me look at him differently from I could never be interested in this person to, wow, like maybe I had misjudged you. Like maybe you're actually this really incredible human being. And, I just kind of judged the book by its cover, so to speak. So he had been trying to make his business work for several years. His background was he was a tradie. And he had just, had his own breakthrough and figured it out, paid off all of his debt. He had loans from credit cards, personal loans from family. He'd paid them all back. And so this point in his life where he was moving overseas with his business partner, having just paid off $45,000, kind of made me think that I can overcome where I am right now in my $34,000 of debt, feeling like a failure, going, this guy recovered from even lower than where I am, so I can do it. Secretly thinking also that I'm smarter than him and I should definitely be able to do this. So I'm like, if I just spend enough time with him, like I will figure out what he's doing and I'll be able to replicate that myself. So of course I go on this retreat and I meet the guys and I try to absorb everything like a sponge. And I do become very fascinated with one of them. So one of them is the only one that brought his girlfriend to a men's retreat, which is so inappropriate, just as a side note, but that sets up his personality, which you'll be familiar with later. So he was super smart and had two different businesses, one of which was a hedge fund. And he told a story one day at breakfast about how he had at one point $100,000 of debt from a previous failed business. I sat there with everyone else at the breakfast table thinking, imagine what it would be like to be $100,000 in debt after you had just gone all in on a business that did not work. And then how would you feel? How would you get out of that? And I immediately thought, this guy must have such incredible mental strength. He must have such incredible resilience to overcome that and bounce back from that and now be at a point where he's a cash millionaire like that in not that long. I think it was 18 months that he recovered from it, which is crazy impressive. To go from negative 100 to something like 1.8 million in 18 months. So I was very enamored with what it would have taken to create that. We ended up having a really great conversation about mindset, and he thought it was great enough to ask me if I wanted to stay in touch. So we ended up building a friendship, and about a month later, I make the big move to leave Australia. So there were many important things about this trip and that retreat. One of the really big things was that a couple of these men had left Australia and they had built these really remarkable lives for themselves overseas. Now, my ex-partner, let's call him Axe, he was a nomad or a global citizen. And so when I asked him where he lived, he said, I'm kind of everywhere. Like I have a house here and I have a house there, but I sort of, will fly to Chamonix for a rave, or I'll go to Burning Man. I'll just kind of fly wherever I want and I'll get tattoos from specialists in Switzerland or whatever. And I was like, this guy's fucking cool and crazy and weird, and I want to live like that. And so I then thought to myself, I need to get out of Australia. I need to get out of Melbourne. I need to get out of my rut, and I really need to change my environment. Now, we will talk about the importance of environment at some point during this podcast because it's very profound and there are really important psychologies when it comes to environment and who you're surrounding yourself with, which I can't wait to share with you. I realize that living with my mom, who has a lot of generational and intergenerational trauma from growing up during the communist revolution and in absolute extreme poverty, has it's not great for me and my mindset and me trying to do something that is very against the grain and something that hasn't been done before in my lineage. And so I'm realizing that being around her is not actually helping me as much as I think it is. Maybe I'm saving on rent, but what is the larger opportunity cost of me being here? Maybe the lack of progress is far more of a cost than the rent itself. And when I have that realization, I'm also targeted with this post that came up in the algorithm where Sam Ovens, if you don't know who Sam Ovens is, he is probably one of the grandfathers or daddies of online entrepreneurship. He built like a $30 million a year business, very young, grew up in New Zealand, ended up in the US. And he was making a move from New York to LA at this point in time, sharing the importance of environment. Sharing that when he grew up in New Zealand, this was his mindset, blah, blah, blah. And now he was at a point where he was focusing on the happiness of the team and work-life balance. And so he wanted to take the team and the office to California so they could go to the beach, have beers after work, and kind of transition out of the phase where the business was really focused on publicity and fame and him being like the man. So he was like, okay, well, where is the environment that's going to really sustain and support this vision that I have of prioritizing the people? And that's how he made that decision. So I'm sitting there asking myself, what environment is conducive to my dreams and what I really want to do? And that's a question that has stayed to me to this day. And whenever I think about something that I want to create or achieve, I ask myself the question of environment and who in my life, or who might I potentially have access to through my network, could be people that I would want to surround myself with to integrate and accelerate that journey of what it is I want to do or become. I wanted to move to New York. I did this small trip to Chicago to visit a client that I was doing some content consulting work for. She was a 7-figure coach. And on that trip, I visited a friend in New York and a friend in LA, stayed with them because I was still super poor and in debt at that stage. But that time that I spent in New York, I remember feeling as though the world was my oyster, that everything was possible, that you could just kind of walk down the street and be enveloped into the city, that your friend could be on a billboard and that someone else would be the creative director here and someone else has a connection at Netflix, and everything seemed really possible and everything was very exciting all the time. And I kind of realized like I just wasn't in that energy. I didn't have access to that energy and I really needed that. And I felt completely different when I was in that. I was willing to work hard. I was willing to do whatever it took, but I needed the right environment. So I came back to Melbourne. This is May of 2019, thinking I need to move to New York City. Also aware that New York City is probably one of the most expensive places in the world to live and that there were visa challenges. Like, how do I do that? How do I get there? After a couple of months of pursuing a visa and trying to make that work, I had finally paid off all of my debt and I was sort of at around, I had about $700, but I had one credit card that I didn't close yet with like a $10,000 limit. And I realized that I wasn't going to be able to go to New York, but I knew desperately that I needed to get out of Australia. So I sat with my intuition and asked it, where do we go? I'm aware that we need to go somewhere, but where is that if it's not New York? And my intuition spoke back and it said, we're going to Bali. Mind you, I had never been to Indonesia before and I had no interest in going to Bali, let alone living there. And I think it's because I had this very specific image in my head of Bali as this very overly developed touristy destination. And when I travel, I love to go to off the beaten places like Cuba or, you know, parts of Cuba that are very undeveloped and things that I will kind of not necessarily run into big crowds like you would, you know, in Rome, for example. So I thought, you know, it's not really something that appeals to me. And at the same time, it also made sense because it was very affordable and I did have a few friends that I'd met from coach trainings that lived there. And I thought, you know, I know a few people. It seems affordable. Okay. 2 weeks later, my things were packed in boxes and I was on a one-way flight to Indonesia. I get there, sort out the logistics of joining a gym, you know, co-working space, finding a villa with housemates, and within a week, I was settled and I had a new life. And I couldn't believe how quickly everything happened and came together. Within the next 30 days, I saw the impact of that different environment do its work. All of a sudden, things started to change. I hired a business coach that helped me put together an offer, very simple one. I launched that offer. Suddenly, I was making decent money. And then I thought to myself, oh my God, I can really live here. I can really do this digital nomad thing. I can actually support myself. I can survive. You know, I just need to keep doing this and everything's going to be okay. My ex-partner, Axe, helped me a lot in that moving process. So he gave me a lot of tips about, you know, how to make sure that I find the right people in Bali and just in general, like who you want to be networking with when you're mindful of your mindset and how malleable it is, you know, and that kind of old adage of you are the 5 people that you spend the most time with, you do become those people. And we'll talk about the science of that at another point. But it's very true, both neurochemically and also through social learning and from a psychological lens. So I became very discerning about how I was spending my time, who I was spending it with, and what ideologies and beliefs I was adopting and what I wasn't available for, or what I thought would not be necessarily helpful for me and where I wanted to go. When I had settled into Bali, business started doing really well. And, through the various support of different, business coaches and programs, all of a sudden I had kind of launched a really great scalable group program. And before I knew it, I was kind of on this trajectory of scaling an online business, and I became this educator in the messaging, marketing, content, and branding space. And then I launched other programs in human design, in launching, and that became the business. All while that's happening, I have a desire that never really went away from when I was 18 and deciding to go to film school, which was that I knew that I wanted to be a storyteller of some kind. I knew that I wanted to make a really big impact, and that my unique gift was my ability to tell stories in a very unique way and to really find compelling stories that had deeper layers. And I would regularly kind of critique great cinematography in film and think, oh man, if only there was more character development here, and if only that story kind of explored these themes a little bit more. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to tell stories that could inspire people, empower people, and awaken people. And that's how I wanted to use that gift. I wanted to write, and I also wanted to make films. So what I also knew back then is that to really survive in the film industry, and I think it's very different now to what it was 15 years ago, you need to have money. You need capital. And I was not someone that came from money, and I didn't have any connections in the film industry whatsoever. So I decided at some point in my film degree that I needed to go out and figure out how money worked and how the world worked so that I could make my own money and fund my own indie projects. Because there is so much red tape, there's so much bureaucracy, and raising capital for films is actually really hard. And, when you have a lot of money, you're also kind of at the mercy of other people and stakeholders and people having their 2 cents. And sometimes you as the director or as the visionary can feel very compromised, because the person that has the power is really the person that has the money. And if you're the creative, you can always be replaced, and you can kind of always end up being a puppet to the guy that has the briefcase, if you know what I'm saying. So I was like, well, maybe I can figure out a way to be the creative and the guy with the briefcase. And that's what I need to do. And so I dedicated probably like 5 years of my life to really focusing on learning marketing, learning business, money, investing, like all of the things that had really intimidated me that I knew nothing about, and trying to kind of reframe the way that I was seeing the world so that I could better understand what rich people knew. And, I read all of the books that they recommend, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, 4-Hour Workweek, all of that stuff. And it's all great. It works. And I realized that, you can spend your life resisting and fighting the game, or you can just learn how to play the game. And the better thing to do is to just learn how to play the game. So I kind of surrendered and learned how to play. As things progressed, I was in a very specific type of relationship with my business where it was close enough, to doing what I wanted. Like, to some degree, I was using my ability to communicate. I was helping people. I was using some of my behavior background. I was using some of my storytelling skills, and I thought, yeah, this works. This is great. And I'm really grateful to be able to do this from anywhere. And I'm really grateful to even have a business that works. But for anyone that is an entrepreneur, you'll know that the journey of growing a business is grueling. It's not linear. It's not straightforward. And it's very testing depending on what you want to achieve as well and how fast you want to get there. It can crush you. And the hardest part about building a business is not the strategy, it's the mindset and who you become in the process. So my goal while I was building an online business was to get to $1 million. I don't know why. I think I just adopted it from everyone around me who was sort of going for the same goal. But somewhere in my subconscious, there was a part of me that was like, if I just have $1 million in my bank account, then I can kind of be free and I can do what I really want to do and I can tell my stories and I can write my books and I'll be free. And so I kept reinforcing this belief that I need to make money now, and then when I have that money, I'll be free. So because I wasn't intrinsically motivated to pursue what I was doing for the sake of it, I would often become quite stressed. I'd often become quite emotional because I was either going to be closer or further away from my bigger goal, which wasn't to just be there for the sake of being there. It was to have the money. I was working for the money and I wanted that money, to validate all these different things about myself, but also because I wanted it to finally feel free. And there was a really miraculous scaling journey, but it was also very painful. 2020 rolls around, and just before the pandemic hits, I decide that I want to move to Lisbon. I moved to Lisbon, very excited about, my newfound location freedom and the fact that I have this online business. Lo and behold, who happens to show up in Lisbon but our friend Axe, who is now single. So we end up having dinner, catching up, and then we get the news that we're about to go into a global lockdown. So we decide to band together and get a house in the Portuguese countryside. He invites a couple of his other friends to see if they want to come, and we can kind of build this like mastermind house, which was a great idea. At that point, it was too late for anyone else to want to travel. Everyone was sort of like, nope, like I'm staying where I am. That's too risky. And so it ended up being just the two of us living together as friends. And, you put two heterosexual people of the opposite sex in the same house and eventually something's going to happen. So it took us like 6 weeks, I think. Then we got into a relationship. We sort of fell in love and everything happened very quickly. And of course it was a lockdown, so everything was very exacerbated by that. When we got together, it was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. It was very intense. It was very passionate. It was very familiar, and it was very charged. I was very confused by all of those feelings. And I thought, wow, like I've never felt this way before. This must be something really significant. Like maybe we're soulmates, like what is this? The twist is that he was still in love with two of his ex-girlfriends. And so began a love triangle between me and one of them. And he would regularly play us, not necessarily against each other, but we would be aware that the other one was there and that he kind of was going to have to choose one of us eventually because everyone was monogamous and, everyone wanted to be chosen. And so we were in this kind of weird triangular game of being like, okay, well, is he going to choose me or is he going to choose the other one? And what I didn't realize at the time is that what was showing up in that relationship was also showing up in my business. And it was a lot of the same fundamental patterns that were causing a lot of pain in these two different areas of my life. So 2020, 2021 were two of the hardest years I experienced also, following 2019. So it's just like a real rough patch. Hit my Saturn return in 2020. And so that really didn't help. As we get to the end of 2020, we broke up and I decided to move back to Bali when the borders had just opened. I get back in, I have this new boyfriend, I have my friends, we're all living together, it's great. And somehow we kind of get roped back into a conversation. At this point in time, he was living in the US. I think it's because I had money in his fund. And so he had sent me an update. He sent an update to all of his investors saying, this has now gone up and we're entering a bull run and it's really exciting and here's what I'm planning. And so I think we then got on a phone and ended up being on the phone for about 3 hours talking about the markets. Now, this is a man that had fundamentally shaped my business and investing journey, which didn't really exist before him. He taught me so many things about money, so many things about money mindset, helped me become a global citizen, helped me understand like how to optimize everything in my life, from technology to my marketing funnels to even looking at how I could retire early and make all of my dreams come true. So a really big influence on me in many, many ways. And, the cost was all of the pain that came from this weird love triangle that we were in, which I couldn't handle, but also kept getting roped back into. So 2021 became a journey of two things that I was pursuing. One, relationally, I wanted him to choose me. I really convinced myself that we would have this like happily ever after in my head, and that, we'd be soulmates. We kind of like ride off into the sunset and be this like really cute travel couple or something to that extent. And then the other thing that I was pursuing was the $1 million. I'd finally gotten my ads running. I'd finally built this funnel. I was launching. Things started to look really promising. And I thought, this is going to be the year. This is going to be my $1 million year. So I'm pursuing these two things pretty aggressively, thinking, yeah, he's going to pick me because it's so obvious. Like, of course, we're going to end up together. And I even started working with a facilitator who I would screenshot, our text messages, and I would send them to him and be like, he said this, what do I do? What's my next move? How do I play this? And I started gaming my ex-boyfriend, learning a lot about what works and what doesn't with different people. We get to a point where finally I think, okay, I'm definitely winning. He's going to pick me. Because he was in America, and he was either going to fly to her, she was in Portugal, or he was going to fly to me in Bali. Again, we're navigating closed borders, restrictions, all these kinds of things. And then he turns around and he picks her. And I was so shocked and mortified, because everything up until that point was pointing to me as the very obvious choice. So then he's like, yeah, I'm going to fly to Portugal. So I broke up with him, blocked him, said I was never going to speak to him again. And within a day or maybe 2 or 3 days of me making that declaration, he then comes back with this big letter telling me that I'm his soulmate, and it was always me, and of course it was me. And it was like 8 pages of letter. And at this point, I'm like, no, that's crazy. If you need me to like take my cards off the table for you to choose me, then it doesn't count. Like, it's too late. Several months pass. I'm processing, I'm healing. And I then get a message through our business conversations. And the message update is, your portfolio is now worth $2 million. Mind you, I had originally put in about $280,000 altogether, which was my entire life savings. And I had an apartment in Melbourne that I sold. Any money from the business that I had made, I had funneled into that fund. And so during that bull run of 2021, he had basically almost 7x'd my investment. And I thought, oh my God, this is it. I'm retiring. I'm 29 or 28 and I get to retire. This is amazing. Oh my God, this is brilliant. And I sit with that thinking about, what am I going to do with it? And I have this realization, which is that, hey, shouldn't this feel better? Shouldn't this feel more of an accomplishment? Because it's not, when you kind of finally become a millionaire, considering this is something I've been pursuing for such a long time, I thought that this would feel different. And it's kind of empty and shallow and, it's weird. And I was just very anticlimactic. So I'm, trying to think about what to do with it. Maybe we'll withdraw it, And, either I was waiting too long, or, we were disagreeing on him being okay with me taking it all out, and then him actually not having a relationship with me anymore, because that was kind of our last tie and our last connection to each other. And I think he really wanted to have me still be very financially codependent on him, because it made him feel needed and wanted and significant in his own way. I kept everything in the fund. And then on the 9th of May in 2021, there was an event, as they say in the crypto world, a cascading liquidation of everything. Conspiracy theories about who came in and messed the markets up. But ultimately, what you need to know is that his $60 million fund was liquidated down to $2 million overnight. My $2 million went down to about 40,000 overnight. And it wasn't that the value of a coin had gone down and that it would eventually go back up. When you liquidate, you have a forced sell. So nothing was coming back. That was it. He'd lost millions overnight. He was shattered. I was obviously shattered and experiencing all of the stages of grief, which I had never really any experience in up until that point. So he calls me and explains to me what's happened. My very first reaction was to comfort him and see if he's okay. Oh my God, you've got 200 investors. This must be so hard for you. Again, our very typical pattern that we were in back then. He explains how I can help myself navigate the grief. I decide to go on a quest of sorts, a spiritual pilgrimage. And I go, okay, cool. I'm going to go somewhere very remote and I'm going to just think about what I'm going to do, because I've spent my whole life pursuing this money so that I can finally be an artist. And now I don't have anything. Is the lesson in this whole thing that you shouldn't have ever pursued the money and that you should have just always gone straight for the artistry, and that you just, trust that the net will appear underneath you, and that if you just start going for it, then eventually it'll happen? Is that the lesson that I needed to learn? What's the universe trying to teach me here? Or do I need to rebuild the business, and do I need to commit and persevere through this hardship? So I really went to figure out what to do. I went to go see one of my really good friends, Andrew Pierce, who I like to call the Dali Pierce because he's so wise. Asked him what to do, and he said, Phoebes, don't seek for an answer, because when you seek for something, you'll never find it. Only from the place of already knowing will your awareness remember what you always knew. So surrender the seeking. Do nothing internally. Don't look for anything. Don't try and figure anything out. Don't share anything on social media. Don't journal. Just do nothing internally and surrender everything. Some of the best advice I've ever gotten to this day. So I pack my backpack and I start this 40-hour journey to a very remote island on the easternmost point of Indonesia. It took 2 flights, 3 boats to get there. And I'm on an island where there is no electricity. They had to go to another nearby island to get a generator for the one light bulb that I had. So that gives you an idea of kind of where I was and how grueling it was. I had a bucket. There was no bathroom. And 2 books my friend AP gave me. One of them was Letting Go by David Hawkins. Highly recommend. The other one was Conversations with God, Book 3 by Neil Donald Walsh. I powered through Conversations with God very quickly and started having these very interesting insights into my experience, into the way that I was experiencing reality, and kind of realizing and remembering that I'm not living the way that I'm supposed to be living. And so what I really remembered and what I really learned during that 10-day period where I was out in the middle of nowhere was that you don't create something from a space of seeking, just like you don't find the answers from a space of seeking. You have to already have it. And these are kind of like the basic principles of manifestation or conscious creation. You have to sort of already realize that there's nothing fundamentally missing because you are all of it. You're the sky, the birds, the trees, you are the fabric of the entire universe. You are interconnected with all things. And separation is only an illusion. So if you create from the space of knowing that you are already all things, then you just continue to create what you already are. You're the process of creation itself. If I wanted to be a successful filmmaker or storyteller, if I wanted to be a writer and create or travel, or what was it that I really wanted that I thought the money was going to buy me? And of course, if I'm trying to get free, then no amount of money is ever going to buy freedom if I don't already believe that I am free. So that was the really big revelation that I had on that island. Was I've been in this pattern of pursuing freedom and trying to do business to get money so I can be free, but what if I was already free? And I flipped it and started, testing to see if this thing that I read in this book actually makes sense and if it works and if it's real. And so I thought, okay, well, if I just forget about money and all of the things I think money is going to buy me, and I start focusing on what I want to call into my experience instead, what are those things? Who do I want to meet? Who do I want to be friends with? What rooms do I want to be in? How do I want to feel about myself and about how I'm experiencing reality? And so I started surrendering the idea of pursuing money to get free and started focusing on, if I could actually manifest miscellaneous things. And so I kind of wrote this list of things that I wanted to manifest within, maybe it was 12 or 18 months. One of them was like, oh, I want to meet this person and they lived in Austin. And one of them was like, I want to be friends with this person and she lived in San Diego. And there were people that I didn't have access to at that point in time because I was this girl from Australia who moved to Bali and I didn't know any of these people and I didn't have access to these networks. And one of them was that I wanted to make some of my money back and kind of, just to do that. And so that was obviously a thing on the list. I went back to Bali and decided, okay, I'm going to rebuild my business, but I'm going to build it with a new mindset, a new way of approaching things, a new way of being. I then re-engage with my ex and we start having these conversations about what we're learning through this mutual experience that we've been on that was really, really traumatic for both of us. And he had a very similar journey where he was also trying to get free for his own reasons. And so I was kind of trying to share with him some of the things that I was figuring out. And, as we're reconnecting and we're sharing this experience, we're also sharing that the emotions are still there, the attraction is still there. And I said, I want you to know that you can call for me at any time and I will come to you. At this point, he's in Mexico. And I'm like, I will come to you in Mexico and I will take care of you and we'll get through this together and we'll rebuild our lives together. And he was like, okay, noted. Thank you. I will let you know when, but now is really not a good time. And at this point, I'm thinking, why isn't it a good time? Maybe he's ashamed because, he's rebuilding his kingdom and he doesn't feel like a man yet. What kind of makes sense as to why someone would turn that offer down? That kind of went on for about 4 to 6 weeks. And then the Indonesian government announces that they're going into another lockdown. And we didn't know if this was going to last 2 weeks or 6 months. And I thought, if there's a chance that I'm going to be stuck on this island for another 6 months with an unresolved loop in this relationship, I can't take it. I need to figure out what's going on with us. We've been on and off for so long, or over a year. And I need to figure out if we're going to do this or not. So I have 72 hours to pack my bags, get out of Indonesia, and fly to him to see if it's going to work. I'm going to cut this episode here and resume the story in our next episode and leave you with a cliffhanger because that's how we like to do things around here.